Okay, the first topic we're going to discuss today is a midpoint. Now, a midpoint is a point that divides a segment into two congruent parts. Okay, so remember our symbol for congruence is a squiggly line over top of an equal sign, and it means that they are equal in all ways. And on our example, that's denoted with these tick marks that match. So we can see here that point M is the midpoint of line segment AB, which means that we also see that line segment AM is congruent to line segment MB. Now, a segment bisector can be a point, a ray, a line, or a line segment. And what it does is it intersects the segment at the midpoint. So it bisects another segment. We can see in our example that we still have AB here, line segment AB, with a midpoint of point M. And we can see clearly that there is this line that is crossing line segment AB at point M. So line DC intersects line segment AB at point M, which is the midpoint of AB. So that means that line DC is a segment bisector of line segment AB. So let's use the information that we just talked about to answer some questions. So we're told that point M is the midpoint of line segment VW, and we are told to find the length of VM. Careful that we just want VM here. So the first thing is, what do we know about VM and MW? Well, looking at our diagram, we know that VM is congruent to MW. We have tick marks that match. We also know, based on the definition of what a midpoint is, that it splits the full segment into two congruent parts. So we know that VM is congruent to MW. Now remember, congruent means that they're equal in all ways. So we can set them equal in an equation. Now we have 4x minus 1 is equal to 3x plus 3. So we just use our basic algebra skills, and there's many things we could do as long as we do the same thing to both sides of our equation. So I added 1 to both sides of my equation. So now I have 4x is equal to 3x plus 4. I want to get all of the x's on one side by themselves. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides of my equation. And now I have 1x, so that's just x, is equal to 4. So I've solved for x. I know that x is equal to 4, but remember my problem asked me to find the length of VM. So now I have to go back up here and I have to plug in 4 for x. So 4 times 4 is 16, minus 1 is 15. So VM is equal to 15 units. Which means MW is also equal to 15 units, and VW, the whole length, would be twice that, so 30 units. Okay, so for the next two problems, it asks us to find the segment bisector of line segment PQ, and then to find PQ. So on the first one, we can see that point M splits line segment PQ into two congruent parts. So we know that M is our midpoint. Now, what is our segment bisector? Well, in this case, we have a ray because it has an endpoint on one end and an arrow on the other end. So our segment bisector is ray MN. Now, we don't have to set up an algebra problem here because PM is 3, which means we know that PM is congruent to MQ. So we know that if PM is 3, MQ is also 3. Now, it asks us to find PQ. So if PM is 3 and MQ is 3, then PQ is equal to 3 plus 3, which is 6 units. Okay, so our next problem, again, we identify that M is our midpoint. We have two congruent parts. So in this case, we see that our segment bisector is line L. We know that segment PM is congruent to segment MQ. And we know that PM is 5x minus 7, and that MQ is 11 plus 2x. So I solve for x. We're just following our rules of algebra here, so I have to do the same thing to both sides of my equation. So here we determined that x equals 6, but remember we're finding PQ. So we have to plug in the 6 that we found to obtain the length of the full segment. So 5 times 6 is 30 minus 7 is 23. Now we should get 23 on the other side as well. Let's double check. 11 plus 2 times 6. So 2 times 6 is 12, and 11 plus 12 is 23. So each of our parts are 23. So PQ is equal to 23 plus 23, which is 46. Now we're going to get some practice on the coordinate plane. So to find the midpoint of a segment in the coordinate plane, we're going to average the x coordinates and the y coordinates. Okay, so this formula may seem a little scary, but it's literally just the average of the x's and the average of the y's. So you may see it written as an x with a line over the top of it and then a y with the line over the top of it, because x with a line over the top of it means the average of the x's, and y with a line over the top of it means the average of the y's. We have two x coordinates, so that's why we added x1 plus x2 and then divided by 2 to find the average. The same idea with the y coordinates. So for this example, we're going to find the midpoint of RS if the coordinates are R is 1, negative 3. So 1, negative 3, this is R. And S is 4, positive 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, up 2. I'll just write this a little more clearly here. So our x coordinates, remember x comes first, then y, x, then y. So we've got 1 plus 4 over 2 and negative 3 plus 2 over 2. So 1 plus 4 is 5. And negative 3 plus 2 is negative 1. That's over 2. So then m equals 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. And negative 1 divided by 2 is negative 0.5. And then we can plot that. So 2.5, negative 0.5, and this is our m. Okay, now we're going to find the midpoint of JK. Actually, we're told that the midpoint of JK is m at 2, 1. So we know that m is at 2, 1. And we want to find the other coordinate, the other endpoint of JK. We know that J is at 1, 4. let's think about this, okay? We know that M is our midpoint. So we know that JM has to be congruent to MK. And we know that J is at 1, 4. And we know that M is at 2, 1. And we're trying to find K. So we're just going to call this X and Y right now. So to get from 1 to 2, we had to go right 1. So we're going to go one more. So we know that 2 plus 1 is 3. So our X value is going to be 3. Now to go from 4 to 1, we had to subtract 3. So we need to subtract 3 more. So 1 minus 3 is a negative 2. We're going to plot that point. So 3, negative 2. And if we just look at our graph, we could have figured that out by just looking at the graph. To get from an endpoint to the midpoint, we had to go down 1, 2, 3, and over 1 to the right. So we got to go down 1, 2, 3, and over 1 to the right to get to the other end. Okay, let's try a few more problems, putting this all together. All right, so it says to find AM given that M bisects AC. So we know that M is the midpoint. We know that AM is congruent to MC. So that means they're equal because they're equal in all ways. And AM is X plus 5. And MC is 2X. So I want to get X by itself. So I'm going to subtract X from each side of my equation, which tells me that 5 is equal to X. So now I'm going to plug that in. So 2 times 5 gives me 10. And then 5 plus 5 also gives me 10. So we know that AM is 10 and MC is 10. And let's double check. We were told to find AM. So AM is equal to 10. Can also say that MC is equal to 10. And AC is going to be equal to 20 because it is made up of 2 pieces that are 10 each. Okay, we want to find the midpoints given the coordinates of the endpoints. So we just use our formula. So our formula says that we average our x's then we average our y's. So our x's and our y's. Make sure we remember the x's come first. So 3 plus 7 over 2. For our y's, we get 5 plus 5 over 2. Okay, so 3 plus 7 is 10. We still have that over 2. And then 5 plus 5 is also 10. That's still over 2. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So our final answer is the 0.55. Okay, now we want to find the midpoint given the coordinates of the endpoints, as j is -7, -5, and k is -3, 7. For the y's, we have -5 plus +7 over 2. Okay, so -7 plus a -3 is a -10. And a -5 plus a +7 is a +2. This is still over 2. So -10 divided by 2 is -5. And +2 divided by +2 is 1. So m is the point -5, +1. Now the last one's a little trickier because we want to find the end point. So we are going to be told that we have a line segment RS that has a midpoint of M. So we know that the pieces are congruent on either side. So RM is congruent to MS. And we know that R is at the point 5, 1. And M is at the point 1, 4. So now we have to find S. Now we know that S is going to be in an XY format, but we want to find the numbers. So we take our X's and we figure out that to get from 5 to 1, we had to subtract 4. So to get from 1 to the X value of our S point, we need to subtract 4 more. So 1 minus 4 is -3. Now we look at our Y's. To get from 1 to 4, we added 3. So to get from 4 to the y value of our other endpoint, we need to add 3. So 4 plus 3 is 7. So S is the point, -3, +7.